Hi everyone, my name is Gene with Enjoy Beekeeping, and my bees just told me that I should buzz off. Have your bees said the same thing to you without you knowing it? Let's go in the bee barn and start there. I'm going to show you in this episode what my bees did to tell me that I should buzz off because they're doing just fine without my help. Let's take a look. Okay, I told you we'd start in the bee barn. I've got my decommissioned observation beehive. I've decommissioned it because I've actually built a better one. And this is when I first started to hear the whispers of my bees telling me that I should buzz off. So here's what I want to show you. When I made this first observation beehive, I made it so that the bees could live in it 24/7, 365. I wanted the bees to live in it full time. It wasn't for show and tell where you go out to the bee yard, put a few frames in, and then go to a trade show or something like that. This was intended for the bees to live in year-round so that you could actually see what's going on every day in the life of a bee. And it's big enough, it's got about a 10-12 gallon volume so that the bees can live in it year-round. So what I thought I was doing was being super helpful by cutting ventilation holes that I'm going to show you here. So I've got 3 ventilation holes on this side, and I've got 4 on the other side because I didn't want them to get too hot and stuffy. And because there's the plexiglass front, I thought, you know, there's going to be condensation. And there was condensation. We're going to talk about why that's not the end of the world either in just a minute. But I want to show you when my bees told me I should buzz off. If you take a look at these ventilation holes, I've got number 8 hardware cloth in them. Okay, and it used to be when the bees were first put in, you could actually see through that hardware cloth. But little by little, and in the summer, they would go out and harvest propolis, and then they would plug it up. And guys, I'm going to tell you something. They didn't just put a little bit of propolis in there. They boogered these up to the point where if I wanted to, I'd have to use a stick of dynamite to get these holes open again. This was a clear message to the beekeeper: buzz off. We don't want this much ventilation. In fact, they plugged up every single one of these vent holes. So I've got 7, I got 3 on this side, 4 on the other side. They plugged them all solid, not just a little, they plugged them solid. Now I have another vent. It's not, well, it's kind of a dual purpose. It's a ventilation, but also a feeder jar placement hole at the top. So that's there, and if I need to feed bees, which almost never happens, I really do everything as much hands off. That includes feeding. So they have to forage. These bees that I have in my apiary, they got to go out and work. So they go get the nectar, they make the honey, and guys, they do just fine. The only time I ever feed in an observation beehive is if there's a new swarm that I just shook out of a bush or something, and I'll have them go up a ramp and into the tube, and they'll take this as their home. They'll take this as their permanent home. I'll put a sugar jar on there for about 2 or 3 days just to kind of give them that little housewarming gift. So the top, I'll show you the top, looks like this. So let me bring you over. Okay, so let's have a look in here. So here's the top, and that is the number 8 hardware cloth that you see right there. And that's what it looked like here on the sides. Now I'm going to take you down. Now I put a tissue in that one, but come down to this one here, and I'll zoom the camera in, and look at all that propolis. It's almost, well, it's hard, and you can tell that at the time when they were packing it, it was still soft, and it sort of dripped a little bit, and then it solidified. So this is the case on every single hole, all of them. I could harvest that propolis out of there if I wanted to. There's so much. I call this hive my blue ox. It's a Lazutin style beehive. It's got the 18-inch depth frames. This is built with 3/4 plywood all around, but I've got 4 inches of that Dow styrofoam board insulation in the top. But you know what I wanted to do when I first built this hive was, naturally, I wanted to give them some ventilation. So inside, I'm going to show you that I've got a nice ventilation hole cut for them so they wouldn't get too hot in the summer or too much moisture in the winter. Take a look what they did. Okay, here it is on the inside, and I've even got my notes that I kept on this hive ever since I caught them. They were a swarm that I actually got from a tree back in March of 2020. So we're coming up on 2023, so they've been in here 3 years without any kind of treatments or much intervention from me whatsoever. I've never fed them a drop of sugar, and they're doing fantastic. But the interesting thing about this particular hive is it holds 20 frames, and I'll just tell you this real quick. I've got a follower board at about the 14 frame mark, and the follower board goes down almost to the floor, and I've got about a 3-inch gap because I built this hive with that extra dead space at the bottom below the frame, so it's got about 3-4 inches of dead space for that air exchange to take place. And in the summertime, or actually late spring, when the bees are really starting to pack honey, the bees will make sure that everything in the brood nest is perfect. They've got all the honey stores they want. Then they go underneath the follower board, because I've got a gap there. I've got an air gap. They come onto this side and they start packing honey on the empty side. And I've never changed it since day one. It's propolized everything into place. And now I don't even open the brood side ever. I only come in here if the bees look good. I don't open it, and I come in here in the late spring or summer, and if I want a frame of honey, I'll take a frame of honey. I try to wait now until about the first frost before I'll take honey from them. So if they've got honey, this is where they keep it, on the far end after the follower board. I'll show you that. Come on, check it out. Okay. Okay, so take a look, and look what they did. Here is my ventilation hole that I gave them, and they plugged it solid. Now I had this hole, if you look, let's see, I had the hole, and I also cut a hole inside my styrofoam insulation so that it could vent, truly vent out. It didn't just stop at the styrofoam, it went all the way up through the roof. And they plugged it solid, and you can see more propolis. I've got a towel just kind of stuffed on top of that follower board, and I've jammed it in there, and they keep the hive beetles out by jamming all that propolis in there. But they told me to buzz off when I gave them this ventilation hole, so your bees might have told you the same thing. Now this one is a lay-in style beehive, and it's made with dimensional lumber. And I did the same, well, I didn't quite do the same thing for them, actually. I didn't cut a hole through the top center, but I cut a hole right in the front center towards the top, about 1 inch down from the top, and take a look what they did. Now, if you look, this one's a little bit harder to see. I actually put on an entrance gate where I've got ventilation, but I also have here, I've got a piece of aluminum window screen, and I cannot turn this dial. You can see some of the propolis here, but they've got this boogered up tight, no air in or out. And look at the bees right here. Now this is January still. They're rocking, and I've got another entrance here, and I stuffed a Swiffer wipe in it, and they're doing just fine. And you can see they're even bringing some pollen in right now. I don't know where they find it in January, but they do. It was raining here pretty hard yesterday, and the rain stopped about 3 hours ago, so they got busy as soon as they could go out and forage. Okay, here's another one of my 14 frame Lands hives. Now this one is decommissioned right now. We're just going to hopefully catch some swarms this spring, and this will be their house. But I've got another hole cut in the top center, and they did the same thing to this one as the one I just showed you a minute ago. I can't turn the dial because they've pushed so much propolis through the window screen that I've got behind the entrance disc that it's just cemented the little wheel into place. And so again, they told me, dude, buzz off. We're just tired of you cutting holes in our hives, and every time you do, we're just going to plug it up. And that's what they did. I've actually gone and I've scraped the propolis off, only to find it boogered up again in about 2 or 3 more days. So I just quit doing it, and I finally got the message to just buzz off. So one of the big concerns that I had about my observation beehive was that there would be a lot of condensation, and condensation will kill bees, by the way. In fact, that's probably, well, it's up there in the top 3 as far as what kills honeybees. Last video we talked about why it's so important to have a well-insulated hive, okay? Now, here's what happens to a lot of beekeepers. It's one of those rookie mistakes. They've got their 3/4 inch built hive bodies, and they've got their top, and I've got a metal top on this one. And as it gets cold, and the colder the climate, the worse this condition is, the bees will cluster. They'll make a ball in the center. They don't hibernate, but they vibrate in order to keep warm. So there's a little bit of friction going on here. And the warm air is rising. Remember, that's just physics. So warm air is rising, and it's touching this thin top. And as moisture cools, it condenses, and it always goes to the coldest spot of the beehive. So in this case, I've got a top that's made out of 3/4. I've got sidewalls that are made out of 3/4, but all that moisture is going to go directly to the top, and that's because heat rises, and 75% of all the heat that's also carrying that moisture is going to go straight up over top of that bee cluster. It's going to condense, and when enough of it condenses, it's going to drip back down onto your bees. And bees can tolerate cold, but they can't tolerate cold and wet together, and that's where a lot of beekeepers will lose their bees. So what can you do? Well, if you're using Langstroth hives, this is one way that you can take care of that. First of all, insulate your hives. If you want to learn more about the insulating, go to my last video on insulated beehives so you can check that out. But as far as the ventilation concern, because you don't want the air to get stale either, one tip that you can use is you can put an empty box, no frames, just empty, just like this. So this is a 5-frame configuration. It's just what I raised nukes in years ago. It's an empty box. You would put it on top of your landing board, and then all your bees are sitting on top of this dead space. There's nothing there. There's no frames, nothing. But there's enough air exchange taking place on the lower portion here, where that cool air will condense and drop down, and you'll have enough air exchange. So remember, this only works, it's only going to work like this if you have insulation on top too, okay? If you just do this to a hive with no other modification as far as keeping the heat inside around that cluster, the cool air is going to do the same thing whether you use this little box at the bottom or not. So you have to have, I like to use wool insulation, and I also use polystyrene, so I use the polystyrene foam. I use that too. But lamb's wool is really nice, and it's got the same R value as the styrofoam board does. So 2 inches of lamb's wool will give you an R7 to 8, somewhere in there, same thing as the styrofoam board. And so I'll also take a super that's empty, and I'll put it over top of my bees, and I'll fill it with lamb's wool. So I do still have some of these Langstroth hives in my apiary, and that's what I do. I make sure if I'm going to do only one thing with them, I always put a lot of insulation in the top. But then as far as the air exchange, that's so important for your bees, and so where that cool air is then going to go, it's not going to collect at the top because it's seeking the coldest point of the hive. So if you've got a really good insulated top, the heat loss isn't going to be so dramatic there, but it's going to start to attract to the side walls. Now that's not the end of the world. That's okay, because your cluster in the middle probably going to be just fine. So if you get a little moisture on the side walls, it's not the end of the world. And if you have an empty box at the bottom. Same size box as everything else that you have. You don't need to put a top vent in. That's the other thing too that might blow your mind, I guess. I don't know, blew my mind too, because, well, you saw what the bees were doing out in the bee yard. I gave them top vents and they plugged them in the hottest part of the year. They didn't even want to be, they wanted to regulate their own temperature themselves. They're well insulated hives, so thank goodness for that. And they told me to buzz off, stop giving them top vents, because every time I give them one, they're just going to plug them back up anyway. All right, so the air exchange that's necessary in the wintertime, so that cool air is going to sink. And you can just leave this box empty. Some people actually will put some peat moss in the bottom. You can put a couple inches of peat moss down here. You can do that too. That'll wick up some of that moisture. So the moisture in the hive can be detrimental, but it also can be beneficial, because if you think about it, if there's a little bit of moisture on the sidewall and there's a little bit of moisture at the bottom, the bees don't have to fly out on a winter day to get a drink. They can get their drink right inside. In fact, I think there are beekeepers that will put a piece of metal on one side of the sidewall inside, and at the bottom they'll put like a little J channel, and bees can actually go down there to get a drink without having to leave the hive. I've not done that personally, so if you have, shoot me an email, let me know how that's working out for you. I've never tried that. So the only thing I've done is I insulate my hives to death to give them life, and then I make sure that they've got lots and lots of ventilation, but not at the top. I give them that big volume of air exchange, and it works. So I really do like my horizontal hives, and I still do have some that are in Langstroth hives, but the only configuration that I use are 5-frame nuke boxes, and these all hold medium frames. But this is what I wanted to show you. Now, right now the temperature is about 45, 46 degrees. It feels a little bit warmer in the sun, and the bees are out foraging. Unbelievably, it's only February 3rd. They're finding pollen, and we're supposed to get an early spring here in North Georgia. So I took the cue from the bees. They were bringing in so much pollen the other day. Just check out this quick video of one of my horizontal hives that is doing spectacular. They're wintering extraordinarily well, and we've had some pretty cold weather too. So let me just tell you what's going on here. So you see this yellow box right here? This is an empty feeder. Years and years ago, when I used to raise all kinds of nukes for customers, I would feed my bees all kinds of sugar syrup, and that helps them to build up fast. They draw comb like crazy. And so anyway, so they don't serve any purpose for me now except for one thing. And so what I do is, this is an empty box sitting above the feeder. So this whole area here only serves to insulate the top. And so the bees that are in this hive right here are probably all right here, and they're not really using anything down here. So this has got drawn comb in it. No empty boxes at the bottom. They're just mostly clustering up in here. I promise you, if we were to crack this thing open, that's what we would see. So all this is just serving as a nice way to allow a slow release of moisture without having a rapid heat loss. All right, guys, so let me just read this to you right out of Keeping Bees with a Smile. Winter ventilation of the beehive. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can find it for yourself on page 40. So it talks about a tree hollow being the natural place where a bee would live. And here's what it says. It says, in a hollow, the bee cluster usually has a large amount of empty space beneath it. All right, does that make sense? So if you got your bees living in a tree and they draw their comb down, a lot of times there's a big empty space below all that comb, and it's capable of absorbing excess humidity. Now, this chapter is only like 6 or 7 pages long. You can read it in like, I don't know, 5-6 minutes. But here's the, we'll cut to the chase right now. So remember we talked about putting the box, the empty box below a Langstroth hive configuration, just an empty box, no frames. So the principle at work here is a sealed, heat insulating top. All right, no vents at the top, just a heat insulated top and an open space at the bottom. That's the principle, all right? Remember, we talk about beekeeping principles. If you apply these principles to any hive, it'll work. The cold, humid air falls downward and is replaced by fresh air from the bottom. The bees keep warm, and the last line says there's no humidity. All right, so there you have it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this video. And check it out for yourself on page 40. You can read the whole thing and you can get a lot more information than what I covered here in this video today. If you'd like to get your free copy of Keeping Bees with a Smile, just attend one of my North Georgia beekeeping workshops. It's not just a workshop, guys, it's an experience. I'm going to show you all kinds of stuff out in the apiary. We've got a beautiful 30-acre property here. We're really excited about inviting folks back after COVID, finally, to come to some of these workshops. So we've really upped the game on the workshop. It used to just be like a 4-hour event, but now we've got pre-recorded classes that you can watch anytime you want. They're yours to keep, and you'll be able to get the side-by-side experience of checking out the beehives with me out in the yard, and working with somebody that's made every mistake there is to make in beekeeping, probably twice. And I'm doing it to save you from going through the same thing yourself. So check out enjoybeekeeping.com for more information about the 2-day workshop. So that's all for today, friends. Until the next video, enjoy beekeeping.